Right, you're welcome back. And we're looking at, we're taking another look at the power sector privatization. And our guest from Abuja is Chudi Ojukwu. He's a utility regulation specialist. And thanks for remaining with us. Now, let's look at the issue of transmission. Of course, there are three planks to electricity supply in Nigeria: generation, distribution, and of course transmission. Government continues to hold on to transmission. In other words, it has a monopoly on transmission. Should that monopoly be broken? Is that, the missing link to the issue of Nigeria getting enough, electricity supply?
Well, truly, the transmission ownership by the government is not, there's nothing wrong with it. What is wrong is the commitment of government to developing the transmission infrastructure. Worldwide, governments tend to own the transmission network because it's not a very profitable business. And as a backbone of the sector, it requires the government to invest beyond commercial issues. So right now, it's very disappointing how the government has gone about funding the transmission arm of the business, and it has been quite disruptive. If you look at the budget of the Transmission Company of Nigeria, it can hardly build a substation in 1 year. And yet every year we talk about how committed we are, or how power is very important to Nigeria. That shows total lack of commitment on the side of government, and it shows that we are really not prepared for the power sector reform we have advertised. We should be seeing multiples of billions of dollars being pumped into the transmission network. Rather, we see that transmission projects, the average transmission project in Nigeria is about 15 to 20 years, and most of them are still uncompleted. I met a lot of transmission projects when I worked in government about 15 years ago, and they're still in the same state. And I'm usually disturbed when I see government officials come on to say electric power is important, yet year in, year out, the transmission budget can hardly buy a transformer. That is not a sign of seriousness. Government needs to do more. It is not about changing the model or selling it off or concessioning it or whatever. It's about government truly funding it, because in the circumstance where we are, government is the only one that can truly provide the funds that is required to power the transmission network.
All right. When the gate was opened for private companies to come in to become players in this sector, Nigerians had lots of hope. And some of these companies that came in are said to have lots of competence, a lot of experience, a lot of capital to, take things to another level. But several years down the line, things have not really changed from the eyes of Nigerians. What do you think is the challenge in there?
Like I said in the beginning, there have been a lot of broken promises on the government part. Electric power is a highly leveraged business. A lot of the money that you require to do the business is borrowed from the banks. And if the banks continue to see a sector that is bleeding, that is very difficult for them to recover the money, they stop funding. And that is what has happened in Nigeria. You see that the programs that we are committed to, the expansion programs, the refurbishment programs, metering programs, cannot go as planned because there have been regulatory uncertainties. We have on one hand a regulator, one day we issue a different set of tariff regulations and then go back on it. The performance agreements that the company signed with the government has not kept its part. And then you find that the banks, the liquidity of the companies has continued to get worse. So even for the banks to recover the acquisition finance is difficult. So there's no confidence to lend more to allow the companies to expand. In a country like ours, we have a tariff situation where at one time the regulator issues an order increasing the tariff. The courts intervene to cancel tariff increases. This is not how the business is done anywhere in the world. There is no judicial interference where you have an independent regulator. That is totally out of line with commercial realities. And besides, electricity is a product. So you cannot start allowing costs to determine how much a product is paid. It's the commercial realities that should drive that. So when you see investors face that kind of uncertainty, they won't invest. It's not a charity business. They don't carry money and dump into something that you can't get it back. You know, you see escalating currency volatility here in the country. At the time they entered into some of these agreements, the dollar was exchanging at about 156 to $1, and the tariff was fixed on that basis. The tariffs have not adjusted to reflect that the dollar is close to 470 naira, and yet you expect them to make more investments, and you know they're not for that Christmas. The banks are only investing people's money, and they will not put money in businesses that will lose it.
Of course, we do realize that, but you know, in all fairness, should the consumer always be at the receiving end? You know, talking about tariffs, you know, from 22.8 kilowatts of electricity, where now we're expecting, well, we've heard that Nigerians will be paying some 105 naira, you know, per kilowatt of electricity. What exactly does government need to do, you know, not to be vulnerable to these extraneous factors like, you know, lack of forex and the rest of them?
A lot of these things are government risk. They are risks that only the government can bear. Currency, for instance, government needs to bear some of this risk. If you don't want your citizens to feel the full weight of a tariff increase or shock, then you need to provide some form of subsidy. I've proposed in the past that even since gas is our main source of electricity generation, that government should take a hit on the price of gas and subsidize the sector from that angle. You don't need to subsidize the sector from the lower or from the retail end. You can subsidize from the upstream end. Cut the price of gas, because a lot of the price increases you see in power sector are not driven by distribution of the power. They are driven by the cost of generation. So, and the major cost of generation in Nigeria is the cost of gas. So if you drive down the cost of gas, you drive down the cost of power. So you can use that to control to a large extent the final tariff that people will pay. And we also must, as a country, accept that we don't build infrastructure by not making sacrifices. It is not the generation that builds an infrastructure that gets to enjoy it. It's our short-term outlook to things that have kept us down. You know, if we truly intend to build the electricity infrastructure in Nigeria, we need the Nigerians now need to know that they need to make a sacrifice and stop believing that they will have electricity by magic. You know, we are people who believe in miracles, but the electricity itself is a miracle. So we should stop expecting an additional miracle. We cannot defy the laws of physics. We cannot defy how long it takes to build power plants. We cannot defy how long it takes to build infrastructure. All these take time, and we must commit to them and realize that while we are doing it, we may not enjoy it, but there will be a future that will enjoy it. And that's the only way you build infrastructure. If you are trying to develop your infrastructure and also enjoy it at the same time, you are trying to make very short-term and costly mistakes.
All right, Chudi, we'll come back to you on this. Let's bring in Foladele to give us a reaction on social media. Fola, good morning.
Good morning, Ngozi. Good morning, Jude.
Yeah.
Now, Ngozi raised a very good point about whether the consumer should always be on the receiving end. And people online are actually even taking it further back to when privatization started, and they're asking whether, you know, it was a good idea or a bad idea. Yes, some people are in support, some are against. Let's see some of these reactions. Duku Peter says privatization of Nigeria's power sector was a big hoax. The worst I've seen all my days, as electricity is more scarce than gold or dollars. David Okon says, hashtag Nigeria's power sector needs overhaul. Tunde Fashola must review the contracts and privatization of discos, that's electricity distributing companies, need to focus on hydro. Ahmed Rufai Wudil says, you need to look at the power sector to do something about it, because Nigeria as a nation, we're not up to that level of privatization era. Vote and Stay says, consolidate on our wonderful privatization of the sector, work on gas to power and prevent vandalization, then Nigeria will have light always. And the last one here from Sajir Tafa Balewa, he says, Namadi Sambo just gave incompetent and untested investors Nigeria's power sector in the name of privatization. Those investors should be probed. And then someone else said, someone else said that they think that privatization was one of GEJ's greatest legacies. So,
well, our guest actually thinks that the privatization went on, you know, very, very transparently, and there was nothing wrong with it. So I wonder what your question is.
Yeah, well, exactly, because I was going to ask him what he does make of that. What does he think of these tweets? Does he think that, you know, privatization was the greatest idea, or does he think that, you know, we just gave it to the wrong people and they should be probed? Jude?
Well, talking about Namadi Sambo, that's the former vice president. So
yes.
that must be a reaction to something in the past that has happened.
Yes. So, Jude.
Judy, actually.
Judy,
yeah. Sorry, rather.
Go ahead, ask
Judy,
the question.
Are you with us? I was asking, I wanted your reaction to
Yes.
this tweet that said...
Yes,
Okay, I'll just go over the tweet again, if you don't mind. I said, someone here says, Namadi Sambo just gave incompetent and untested investors Nigeria's power sector in the name of privatization. Those investors should be probed. What do you make of this tweet?
No, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair at all. I think that the tendency to want to blame somebody is always there. The privatization program in Nigeria is actually one of the best in the world. What we are having is post-privatization issues, and you know, it's left to the government to manage them. Liquidity, lack of investments, and all that. I've explained to you that businessmen are not charities. The government also must do its own part. If government commits to provide certain things to these investors, it must provide it before you start to hold them accountable. You know, it's not fair to say that the investors have failed or the private people have failed when the government on its own has not provided any support. The government agencies are the principal debtors of the distribution companies. So how can you really expect them to perform? You know, the government itself does not pay its bills. That is an indictment on the government. You lead by example. The government should start paying its electricity bills, and then before it can now start questioning why the sector is illiquid. When most of the debtors are government, the debts are so historical, and that you know they are such a drag on the sector. So you can't just turn around and say, oh, the privatization was wrong.
Okay,
What is wrong is that the issues that have arisen out of privatization are not being well managed, and that the things that need to be done to get us to where we need to be are not being done. Once you do that, you get the benefits of privatization. I've always insisted that privatization itself is not an end; it's a means to an end. You know, so when people treat privatization as an end, that's where they expect magic. You know, and sometimes people sell things based on a certain byline, and they think that that's what they are getting.
Okay.
You know.
All right,
People thought you privatize, you get lights. No, you privatize for certain
that's
reasons.
satisfactory enough.
Thank you, Chidi.
Okay.
All right,
Mike,
thank you,
and
Fola.
see you soon.
Now, well,
we're trying to wind down the time now,
Yes.
but Chidi, let me ask you this before we let you go. Now, you said that government is meant to actually supposed to commit to some of these infrastructure you were mentioning earlier on. Now, if we have to narrow down practically to what is going on right now, are you seeing some semblances of committing to some of these infrastructure?
Well, I would say that you know, that there is some commitment, but it's not as the level at which I would like to see it. You know, a situation where you have the regulatory agency not functioning since December, you know, of 2015 till now, that does not show commitment. You know, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission has not had a commission since December. You know, I mean, for a sector that is very critical, that is very highly disappointing. You know, no vacuum should have been left in that place. You know, the regulator has been operating illegally and issuing orders that it has no capacity to issue without the commission. You know, that's one example of lack of commitment. You know, it's only last month that we hear that regulators have been appointed. That does not show commitment at all. Indeed. I'm also disappointed at the level of investments that have gone into the transmission company. That does not show commitment either. And government does need to provide bailout funds and money to the sector to liquidify it. Without that, we are really not, that is not commitment. Commitment is not to come out on TV and say we are committed. Commitment is to do things that will show we are truly committed to this reform.
And unfortunately, government is cash-strapped right now. You know, it's even written to the National Assembly to go out there and get some
money.
More $29 billion.
Wow,
in
fact, about
that's a lot of
$30
money.
billion.
And very interesting thing, you know, Mr. Chude said there, the fact that government is owing so much, you know, as at the last count, some 800 billion naira is what is being owed NEPA. Okay, well, PHCN.
No longer NEPA, please.
All right, we'll have to say thank you so much, Chude Ojukwu, Utility Regulation Specialist, for speaking with us on TVC Breakfast this morning. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.